What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a little bit of a look at Warhammer 40k Inquisitor Martyr, which like most Warhammer games is an absolute mouthful of a name. But this is an action RPG in the style of Diablo set in the Warhammer universe where we play as an Inquisitor. It's also one of the games that is considered to be one of Warhammer's better games, as they're known for quite a few very mediocre ones. And it's one of a few of the Warhammer games I wanted to check out before the eventual launch of Rogue Trader. And with the very recent launch, yesterday from the time of this video, of its new class DLC, which adds the Sisters of Battle to the game as a playable class, the developers invited me to check it out for myself and provided me some keys to do exactly that, with no obligations to actually make any content for it, but obviously here we are. Now, if you've ever played any sort of action RPG these days, you pretty much know what to expect here. It's your character versus absolute hordes of enemies. You mow them down, gain levels, get stronger to fight even more monsters as you seek to perfect your build. The game is co-op, and probably the biggest thing it has going against it is an always online requirement, which is of course to cut down on cheating thanks to the PvP mode, but nonetheless a bit unfortunate. The rest of the game, though, has been pretty fun. We have 5 classes to choose from, with the Sisters of Battle, the others being Crusader, Assassin, Tech Adept, and Psyker, all of which offer a variety of playstyles, though for the most part they are what you would expect. There are a couple of expertise things which offer you a kind of starting point, though you can later change your weapons, etc. that you have. And while there is certainly some crossover in the various weapon types, each class has something that makes them relatively distinct, like the Assassin using exotic weapons and high mobility, the Tech Adept, of course, bringing in summons via machines that they can bring to the battlefield, and the recently added Battle Sisters' Sacred Rites. Once you pick a class and jump into the game, though, you'll play through an initial sort of tutorial, but once you finish up that scenario, you'll be thrown onto a ship which acts as your base of operations where you can take on various missions, as this particular ARPG uses a mission format. There is, of course, a main story which focuses on a lost void ship that is relevant to the Inquisition, which of course revolves around putting down heresy in the name of the God Emperor. But from our base of operations, we can examine the various sectors of space and take on all sorts of missions as a full member of the Inquisition, which means we can pretty much do what we please and track down investigations, which act as the main story, though there are plenty of side missions, which are effectively a map we jump into and fight off enemies ARPG style. But those are more or less the things you would expect from this type of game. So from there, let's talk a little bit about the combat and the character development. So, combat comes down to your weapons as well as your class. Now, obviously, there's more equipment than that, which will affect all sorts of stuff. However, your play style is largely down to your weapon and your class, as your weapon is going to give you a variety of skills to use and make up a decent portion of what you're doing. However, the other side of that is your class, which will, of course, give you unique abilities and everything that you can trigger that way. And while you pick a starting point at character creation, as your character levels up, you will get access to more and more types of weapons to use, which come with their own abilities, which can then change your playstyle in conjunction to your class abilities. So because of this, there's a decent amount of playstyles and variation to each individual class, especially when you start looking at their class-specific resources and how those blend together with various weapons. For instance, the Sister of Battle, which is new, uses Sacred Rites, which is a variable regeneration source for their resource, which is Faith. At your base of operations, they can choose a sacred rite as they level up, they get access to new ones, but each sacred rite changes how they generate their faith during a mission, and at max faith, they can become an embodied saint, which makes them all-powerful for a short little while, getting an all-new set of very strong abilities to purge the heretic with, which overall is a pretty cool idea, and again, each class has something like that, which I think is neat, and that's where most of your variation in combat is going to come from, but as we level up, there are a few other things to keep in mind as well. There are attributes in the game, and you get a few points in this as you level to adjust freely. However, there are various heroic deeds you can get attribute points from as well, which are like kill so many of this or do this thing, that kind of stuff. And there are the occasional merchants that can just give you attributes and things for various currency. But probably most importantly in terms of character development, we have our passive skills. These are sets of skill trees that each have a theme, so things like health, ranged combat, criticals, that type of stuff. And every time you level up, you get either 1 or 2 passive points to spend in these trees, thus making your character stronger and allowing you to further adjust your build. Though it's worth mentioning that not all of these passive trees are available right away. Some of them require unlocking, meaning you have to perform certain actions or kill certain enemies enough times until that passive tree unlocks, and then you can start putting points into it. You can also reset this, of course, though it will cost you some currency, but nothing too outrageous. To give a few opinions and keep this thing moving, I would say overall the progression systems are relatively simple, which makes this a very easy game to jump into, but at the same time they aren't especially deep either, at least not from what I've played of it. Though obviously, most ARPGs are really all about the end game, which is going to have things like seasons, which change all sorts of stuff. There's PvP, etc. So there are, of course, things like meta, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, the systems aren't that complicated compared to something like Path of Exile, though they still provide you enough variation to feel like the character you're playing is relatively unique. And probably most importantly, the combat felt very fun. And one thing I didn't mention earlier is that there's actually a small cover system in place. So if you're playing a ranged character, you can kind of get into cover, which is an interesting idea for an ARPG. Cover systems really aren't what this kind of game is usually about, which is neat. Though just from my cursory playthrough, just to kind of bring you guys some content here, I did notice a few things that would likely bother me long term. There are slight elevations to the maps, and sometimes if you're on a different elevation than an enemy, your attacks will just go over their head even though you're pointing at them. And the elevation really shouldn't be making a difference. Sometimes it kind of appears to, which can be frustrating. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the always online requirement can be a bit of a pain. Overall, I think the game is still pretty fun. I wouldn't put it quite up there with the best of the best ARPGs, but it is nonetheless a pretty good one. I enjoyed playing it, and I do eventually plan to review this one, though it likely won't be anytime soon. But with the recently released Class DLC, as well as the fact that the game is on sale pretty regularly, I thought it would be fun to go ahead and jump into it and check it out and share some of my initial thoughts with you guys. So, all of that said, I certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.